All right. Yeah, very nice. Well, I know that Taguma is going to get us started here in just a little bit, and there she is. As soon as we think of her, she appears. That's very nice.
Hello, apologies
Oh
for
no,
my delay. I had some challenges getting connected.
you
Let me
too. No problem.
see.
I did too. We've still got some people coming in, and I just mentioned to the group if you have something specifically you'd like to talk about as a group, learn about, always feel free to put those things in the chat. And of course, anytime throughout our meeting, feel free to use that chat. Um, but Taguma, while you're getting your screen shared, I'll just say welcome everybody. I think we can go ahead and get kicked off for our August user group meeting. And thanks so much for being here. We're excited to kind of get things rolling again here in the fall with the new school year. And we had talked about doing some in-person meetings over the summer, and it just it's hard to get people scheduled together. Of all months in July is difficult, and I'm glad people are out enjoying vacations and important things like that. So we're glad for that, and think we'll get some more regular meetings here on our third Thursdays here throughout the fall. So today we're going to talk about Power BI version control. Try to give you some good options on that. But before we do that, I think Taguma had some things to share with us. If you're ready, Taguma.
Yes, I
Awesome.
am. Just confirm you can see my slide deck. Perfect. So full transparency, this is a presentation that was delivered by one of my colleagues at work, but it's all about the Microsoft Build 2023 updates. I think the most notable, if you've got your ear to the ground, is going to be Microsoft Fabric, which they have come out with kind of a one-stop shop that brings together all of the Microsoft services into a single platform and UI, which is really, really helpful. Um, and to the second point, it removes the need to stitch together different services because they're all in the same place. So I'm going to next slide. There are several aspects of Fabric. I'm not going to cover everything. I just have a couple of highlights. One of them is Azure Data Factory, which works to ingest and transform data from various data sources, as well as with the building of data pipelines. So if you are sourcing data for your reporting from a warehouse, you can also use ADF to build those pipelines out to source your reports. Let's move to the next slide. One of them is Synapse Data Engineering, which offers some similar functionality to ADF in that it allows users to design and build infrastructure to organize, store, and process data. And these are the various icons that are available or were available at the time of release. Things change frequently, so the icons might have changed a little bit. I think one of the things that was most notable for me after build when I went into service was that the icons were different. The data set, they kind of took off all the color, which was an adjustment. But now I like it. It's a nice improvement. It took a minute to get used to, but it's a nice improvement. Let's move to the next slide. Another one is data warehouse. So they have two data warehouse experiences. One is the Lakehouse and then Synapse Data Warehouse, one being a read only, and the other is just more your traditional out of the box data warehouse, similar to the other tools that are available in the market. This should be my last one, Synapse Data Science, which is for doing your data science and machine learning models. There's more. Synapse Real-Time Analytics to work with streaming technologies. If you've ever created a report that leverages streaming data, you could use Synapse Real-Time Analytics as well as Event Hub to process and ingest that information into Power BI to build your reports. And lastly, Power BI, this is slide 7. Power BI also has, sorry, Power BI, which we're all familiar with for our report development. I'm missing my transition slides here, but they also launched Copilot, which is an AI solution similar to ChatGPT that can be incorporated with your reporting. And lastly, OneLake, which is kind of storage for all of the computing services. There's a lot of documentation out there. I encourage you to take a look and see. Microsoft did an amazing job pulling this all together and then providing really useful documentation to help users get in, start figuring out what they can use and how to leverage the various tools. This is Copilot, which I chatted about earlier, which is basically just leveraging AI. I think there's, depending on who you ask, there's concern about AI taking over our jobs. That's not going to happen, but it is a useful tool if used correctly. So don't try to turn in your thesis using ChatGPT, but it is a useful tool if used correctly to help with your, building out your visuals, as well as kind of leveraging some of the existing functionality. I think it's called like key insights or something in Power BI, I forget. And so it enables you to stitch those two together for a more interactive experience. And this is from the Microsoft documentation where they've leveraged Copilot within a report. All right, I'm not going to cover Git integration because Brent's going to cover source control. So we're going to just skip right over that one. One that I'm actually using right now is the log analytics, which I think, in the initial rollout of kind of the tenant admin offering, it gives you a holistic view of the analytics at a tenant level. But, for anyone who's worked at a large enterprise, there are several workspaces with workspace admins. And I think that this log analytics view gives workspace admins more insight into the functionality for their specific workspace, which may not be, which they may not have if they're not also a tenant admin. More admin monitoring information. And then one thing that I liked about the template that they provided, and all of this was provided by Microsoft, there's like a link to GitHub page where you can download the templates for the different reporting. And the key items that I took from there were the activity overview, the analysis, and the activity detail, which just, again, provides additional visibility at the workspace level for workspace admins to see what's working, what's not, and really help support in change management and adoption of analytics and reporting that's being put out and shared within the organization. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Brent, myself, or Jeremy. And also please check out the Microsoft documentation. They did a really good job with this. And that's all for me. Back to you, Brent.
Thanks, Taguma. Yeah, so Fabric is going to be a very big deal for Microsoft. I know we've touched on before in our group things that are going on with Databricks and things that are going on with Snowflake. And of course, for a long time, Microsoft's had that offering called Synapse, and they still do, but it's being rolled into this umbrella with Fabric, rolled in and also improved greatly, I think is the idea. So it will be something to keep an eye on, just so everybody is aware. Those Fabric workspaces, they got brought into the Power BI experience. So that's why everything seemed to turn green. Actually, Power BI turned green about 2 months before the build announcements, the Microsoft build announcements in May. Everything turning green. And then you'll see a lot more OneLake mentioned in the Power BI tool itself. So I think what Microsoft as a player, it's not like they were so far behind maybe AWS and Databricks in their story, but this is certainly one of their strategic moves to try to catch up and maybe even leapfrog. And one of the biggest advantages that they had in that story is Power BI. They have the favorite, I think, the market leading data visualization tool for those things. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Any other questions, thoughts about Fabric? I know there's a lot to answer still. Okay, great. Well, what I want to do with version control today is I'm just going to kind of step through these slides, but the slides are very light. It's really just a matter of kind of helping us navigate through different options that I'm going to present today. So some of the options we're going to talk about, essentially how to use two different repositories to do version control on your Power BI files. The first one is SharePoint, and there's a few different ways of doing that. So I'm going to break that down essentially into two large categories of how to use SharePoint as a way to get version control on your Power BI files. The second one is Git. So that also will come in kind of two different flavors. One is just using Git to track your PBIX files, and the other is this totally new feature that is a preview feature called PBIP, which is short for Power BI projects. So really both of these came out with new options in June of 23, and there's two new preview features that can support version control, one more directly in SharePoint and OneDrive, and one more directly in Git. So we're going to do a demo of really all of these. And hopefully in here you can pick up something that might help you if you're not doing version control today to have a little bit better version control. As always, feel free to drop questions in the chat. I've got that pulled up here on my other screen if I'm looking over here. We also have Melanie Jones with us, who's on our team, and she's also here helping us kind of keep an eye on the chat, and she'll break in when I get rolling and don't notice that that's going on. So with that said, let's jump right in and start thinking about version control in Power BI. So if you're like most organizations, you probably have at least one sense of version control, and that's, well, I go out to the Power BI service and I download whatever is currently published. That's not the end of the world. The nice thing is you get the latest refreshed file, because if it's connected and it's got a scheduled refresh, then you're getting the latest data with it. All right, saves you the step of refreshing it locally. Or maybe if you don't have access to the data sources, it does it for you. However, it does take quite a long time, as you're probably familiar with. If you use this option and you say, I want a copy of my report and data, you might also notice that for very large files, it does not work well. It takes a long time and sometimes can even exceed your local limitations. So there's probably a better way. As important as these PBIXs become in our organization, we're going to look at a couple of better ways to do that. Well, there's a technology that's been around for a long time that supports version control. And really what's interesting is not everybody is even aware that it does. And that technology is SharePoint. I'm going to attack it from the SharePoint side. So we actually have a SharePoint site where we host our Power BI user group documents. And so I'm going to use this today to kind of demonstrate these features. In every SharePoint Online library, you can click on a file that's posted there, and unless you've intentionally gone out of your way to turn this feature off, there's actually a version history built in to every SharePoint document library. So we can click on this version history and see that I edited this a few times this morning. I was just kind of getting things ready for today's presentation. We can go back and find that we can restore or view past versions of this file. Another thing that isn't necessarily immediately obvious is that SharePoint's document libraries and OneDrive are the exact same technology. They're implemented a little differently. OneDrive is meant more for you and your files to be able to share with your colleagues. SharePoint is more set up for a team to have a place to share things. but technologically and functionally, they do the exact same thing, and you can interact with both of them pretty much the same way. That's why sometimes when you're in your OneDrive, you'll also see all these teams listed below. And when you're in Teams, you'll see your OneDrive. It can be a little confusing, but cool thing is it's keeping track of versions for you. So then the question then becomes like, how can I most easily save my files into OneDrive? So that's what we're going to kind of look at first. We're going to just use this, like, this is the option that is easiest, doesn't really require a lot of any technical knowledge, and you will get version control kind of out of the box as you use this. So with a SharePoint library like this one, if you get into the folder and you uncheck all the files, next to it, you'll see this sync button. And some of you may be well familiar with this, but I just want to make sure to cover it for those who aren't. If you click on the sync button, pops up, it actually downloads a little file and kind of tells you I'm synchronizing things. And it's going to use your local OneDrive app to actually kind of, your OneDrive app will then manage and take over that two-way synchronization. If files appear on the server, it will download them. If files appear on your computer, it will upload them. Just like, and probably you're doing this with OneDrive already automatically. So same technology, same concept, it's just backing it up now to this folder. And this is kind of our general folder. You can see we have folders for every month we have a meeting. We kind of keep the presentation there and things like that. All right, now that I've done that, how could I take advantage of that? Well, once I've got things synchronized, it's pretty easy. I can simply say File, Save As, and I'm going to make sure I look on my device, and I'll see that synchronized. In my case, this synchronized folder is here. For you, it will say probably like your username, your organization, and then the name of the folder you synchronized. But our current month is right here, and I could just save over this one. Am I sure I want to replace it? Sure, no problem. And the little OneDrive app, I know this is a bit small, but it's spinning down in the corner, and it actually took care of uploading it. So let's see what happens here. If I go back, it says it was modified a few seconds ago. That's a good sign. And if I go back, I click on the three dots and say version history, I've got a whole new version uploaded. Now this works really smoothly, but there are a few conditions about it. So yeah, positives, it's transparent. That's a great thing about it. How often, it's not always a good process for us to try to rely on people to always follow a certain set of steps or checklist, right? And especially if it's a rigorous or what we feel like is a heavyweight process, this has no process at all. One time I've got to save it in the right place, and then I can rely on my synchronization to always be uploading a new version, and it doesn't erase the old versions. I would say I forgot this SharePoint site is in Pacific time for no reason. I forgot to update it to Central time. So this is really just a couple of minutes ago. Yeah, fantastic. I would say it works well because to check. Okay, great. Yes, Alex, that is a great question. Okay, so Alex chimed in and said, what's the easiest way to check for changes between versions? And also wondering if comments is used like a description. Great question, and we'll talk about that. Yeah, so it's very transparent, it's very easy. But what might not work as well is that as the size of my file increases, so these can grow up to easily over 100 megabytes, 500, or even up to a gigabyte nearly is the limit for a file. And that would take a long time to synchronize back and forth and create a big storage load on your SharePoint site as well. You get a terabyte, most scenarios I see, people have plenty of room in OneDrive. Still, could be a little awkward waiting for uploads and downloads of these really big files. And Alex, you did a great kind of segue there. What we're not really getting here is any diffing between the files. Like, we can't necessarily tell what changed. We know something changed. We also get no comments about why those things changed. So this is the easiest way, but it's not necessarily the most information-rich way. If you're not doing anything at all today, it might be a good starting point, especially for your smaller files or things you're working on in dev where maybe you're not downloading the whole data set. That's the local sync, set it and forget it method, I guess. That's the way to think about it. Alex, we will answer your question, but before we get there, I would like to show another option because this one is actually new as of June 23 for our preview. So before I show this, I need to point out that it is a preview feature that if I go under File and Options and Settings, Options, this is one that if you want to use this feature, you do have to turn it on here under the Preview Features heading. Every month they've got kind of a new subset of what there is to turn on, but I actually went ahead and turned on these two boxes: Save to OneDrive and SharePoint, Share to OneDrive and SharePoint, which we won't really demonstrate too much today. But when you check this box, your save window looks a little bit different. So I did check that earlier and restarted Power BI. So if I hit File and, well, I'll say Save As, let's do that. This actually is kind of giving me that new experience by default. So you might have noticed earlier, I actually had to click Browse this device and to get this window to pop up. If you haven't checked those preview feature boxes, this is the default experience of what things are like. So to go through that again, File and Save As. Now, I do need to stop my share for just a minute here because when I click OneDrive, it shows this like recent list of SharePoint sites. And I noticed there was some, it wasn't top secret information, but it was rather somewhat confidential with the clients that I looked for different ways of hiding it and I could not get it hidden like I wanted to today. But the point is that it's really going to show a OneDrive type of experience. I'll just go right there. I can show it here because it's a lot more compressed, but it's going to show a window that looks a whole lot like this, like show me my recent OneDrive files, So I'll stop my share for just a second and I'll resume it in just a moment. But I just click the OneDrive button, takes me into the same experience. And I'll get to the same folder that we looked at earlier, and then I'll be able to share again. PUG, general. So I'm really just I can connect to that SharePoint site and save it here, and I'll just hit save. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, okay, I'll share again now. Thanks. I tried to find a different way to do that, and I just never could find something that worked good. You can't take things out of your recents. Tried to like load it with a bunch of new recents, but just wasn't time. So I actually hit I saved it to that SharePoint location. So it's no longer is it saving locally and allowing my OneDrive app to manage the synchronization. It's actually saving it directly out to the cloud. So you get a little bit of a new experience here in the menu bar. It tells you, okay, I'm saving it to this SharePoint site in this folder. Also kind of when it was last saved and when it was last uploaded. Because this file is relatively small at only 6 megabytes, those times are going to be the same. If it was 600 megabytes, I might be saying save and then waiting on it to upload. So let's actually try that. If I hit does this upload and I hit save while I'm in this kind of live connected experience, you'll see this box pop up. Yeah, it goes fast, but it says, do you want to wait? Do you want to clear this window out and upload it later? You're probably somewhat familiar with this experience in other Office apps, where if you're saving it online, first of all, usually it tries to auto-save things for you. And a lot of times we turn that off because it's like, what if I don't want to auto-save? But if I'm saving and I'm saving directly to the cloud, and as I hit save, it's actually just like save, it's publishing it out there, right? Power BI files can be a little exceptional to that because even unlike a big PowerPoint, I mean, they can be a lot bigger even than a big PowerPoint is. So, but let's see if it did indeed upload in our SharePoint folder. And once again, we're going to get okay, good, it did just now. Yeah, it did, but it still came with no comments and it still came with no sharing. So it's not that dissimilar from the synchronization experience. I'm just letting Power BI itself do the upload. And then it's kind of funny, what's going to happen is my local file will be realizing that, oh, things are changing directly on the cloud. Let me download it now locally. So it's kind of making this little triangle between the folders. But that is a new option, and I thought it was worth mentioning if perhaps your organization doesn't allow synchronizations, or certainly there's times you don't want to have that local sync. Maybe you don't want to pull a whole folder down. That's another option. So to get to that question about comments, I actually wanted to show one other repository. So there's one other feature that is also little used, especially these days in SharePoint, that is called check-in and checkout. So this is an option that you actually turn on in the document library settings. Just to go back to our slides, we're going to be talking about SharePoint with check-in and checkout. So we're kind of on 2A here. You turn this on. I'll say library settings here, and it's buried, but certainly with a good Google search, you would find out how. It's here under the versioning settings. So on this last one, you actually can require documents to be checked out before they can be edited. So this comes from this has actually been a feature in SharePoint since way back in the day, probably 2003. More from the paradigm of like, let's have a centrally controlled repository where people have to say, hey, I'm working on this. They have to kind of declare it, like the library, and say, I'm taking this off the shelf. No one else is allowed to take this copy off of the shelf while I'm working on it. And sometimes heretofore with Power BI, that could be a useful feature, because concurrent development is not, let's say, not practical with PBIX files when there's no way to merge their changes back together, right? When you have that turned on, you can add a few other features here, like checked out to, check-in comments. I see your comment, Cassie, and we'll come back to that. Thanks. I'd like to learn more about that too. It's even under the more menu, so it's very buried back here. But I can say, I want to check this out to myself. So I have had some teams who, where they need to work on things concurrently, they've agreed, yeah, this process is a little clunky, but we're willing to go through it. It's always annoying when someone forgets to check it in. It's very annoying when that happens. Now that I'm here, I could open this file directly and do the same kind of save experience, save in OneDrive. And then when I check this thing in, I actually then can say, I can put a comment in here. I changed page 1, something like that. The whole difference between minor and major, you can kind of ignore. Basically, it will make a new version and it will actually have those comments. So there we go. I changed page 1. So you can see the versions and you can get comments. However, still a lot of drawbacks to this. Obviously, kind of a clunky process that people have to follow. You also are having to rely on whoever's changing the file to remember what they changed. So that's where we're looking at right now. But that is not always easy to do, right? Because we click a bunch in Power BI. I went and I added a column, I changed the formatting, I realigned things. Can I even remember everything that I did? Maybe, maybe not, but it is a step up from having no comments at all. At least you get some intention of, okay, I checked this thing out, I was working on it, and when I checked it in, here's why I changed it. They at least, if they can't remember everything they did, they can at least say why. So that's kind of the SharePoint options there. Cassie, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but would you be willing to share, while we're kind of talking about SharePoint here, how ALM Toolkit fits in for you?
Yeah, give me a minute to, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, give me a minute to shut my office door.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's awesome. And I'll kind of pull up the Google page for that while you're doing that?
I don't use it a whole lot, so I'm not going to try to demo anything, but ALM Toolkit is an external tool that you can download, and it essentially allows you to open up two data models and compare them, and it'll kind of give you code to show you, hey, this is what's different between the two. But you can also do that with the deployment pipeline within Power BI Service. It kind of does the same thing, with the development space and then the production workspace that allows you to push it to production. So the company I'm currently with, we're looking to use the deployment pipeline, but we haven't done it quite yet, just because our model is so big and you have to refresh every time to do the comparisons, and our refresh takes a little while. So we're working on getting our model size reduced and then plan on using the deployment pipeline instead of ALM Toolkit.
Very good. Thank you. And thanks so much, Cassie. That's very helpful. So that's an external tool, like Cassie mentioned. So similar to how you would experience Tabular Editor or DAX Studio if you use those, you have to get them installed, and then they'll be listed here as external tools up here in the top. Oddly enough, I really haven't used ALM Toolkit that much, and probably should. But that has been, okay, here's an option for at least getting some kind of diff between two PBIXs. And I think it's been a good option. It's certainly worth exploring. This is a deployment pipeline experience, and I'm surprised I didn't really even think about showing this. I guess I don't think of this as much with version control, but you can see what's changed, which is great. So, or in what's missing and all those kinds of things. So this is just kind of showing two workspaces, and you can see where there's some new files on the development side, some changed files, and also some things that only exist in the test workspace. So maybe I need to bring those back into the development workspace and save them somewhere. Yeah, it's great. Thank you. I think where they're going with these PBIP options, I hope will make the need for ALM Toolkit a little bit less. So, let's move on from SharePoint. As SharePoint is something that doesn't require a lot of sophistication and all those things, which is great. And let's move on to Git. So there may be folks in the group who are familiar with Git and those who are not. Git is a version control system that is more oriented around being decentralized and making it as smooth as possible for a lot of people to work concurrently on a code base, and then have ways of getting their changes all merged back together, which, if you think about extremely large open source projects, is really just quite a technical achievement in itself, and is what has made the open source movement, it's part of the foundation that it's built on, definitely. Because it can do that without creating tons and tons of code, and it's pretty neat. However, it works great with text files and badly with big binary files. Power PBIXs have been files like that because really they're like compressed in a zip format. Similar to that, big media video files, images, 3D models, things like that especially go into gaming. The code base, awesome in Git. Everything else, not so awesome, especially because it actually downloads a copy on every single client's computer who ends up cloning that repo. So if you're not familiar with Git too much, I didn't want to overload, and you can kind of deep dive into learning Git. It does come pre-installed on Mac and Windows these days. When you really kind of get comfortable with it, you start to use the command line, and everything is kind of a command line driven base. But I have a GUI tool called Fork that I really like. It's cross-platform, and I'm going to use that to just keep the conversation more visual and not try to be losing people down in the terminal somewhere. So this is that Fork tool, and just wanted to kind of demonstrate a few different things. So what I ended up doing for this was cloning a repo from Azure DevOps. So that just kind of makes a copy of it here on my computer. Making a branch off of master. So kind of another, like, I'm going to start from this point and start making my changes over here, which is somewhat what is represented here visually by that orange line. And the first thing I did was just I added a folder for Power BI stuff, and I added in the PBIX file, and I created a commit. So when Git looks at that, this is kind of all it shows us. It's like, all right, I have this file that has a PBIX extension. I know that. And I know it is 6.45 megabytes large. And then beyond that, it is just a whole bunch of gobbledygook to me, basically. In Git, every commit kind of represents a check-in or a change. So I'm committing this version. I want to keep track of it. I did another commit where I changed something. And earlier, maybe this is in the file tree, we can kind of actually even open it up and kind of see it like this. And it's like, you can tell, like, to Git, this is, I mean, it's just a bunch of bits and bytes. It's not text. It would much prefer to deal with text, and it's good at dealing with text. It would know all the differences that have happened in a file like this, but in one like this, it's just like, okay, not very good. Now, I did want to mention there is an option. So yeah, the one of the bigger technical problems with doing something like this one's only 6.45 megabytes, but as these files grow, if it's 600 megabytes again, and I actually check it in, I commit it, and I push it, like everybody's getting 600 megabytes on their computer when they pull my branch down. And that's a problem. Thankfully, it's a problem that we aren't the first people to face. So people who work in industries where I'm working on a code base, it's got a lot of graphics, and I'm thinking of let's say of mobile app development. They needed some way to handle that. And so they came up with an extension for Git called LFS. So you do have to configure it. It's a command line thing again, but essentially you're telling Git, LFS comes pre-installed, and it means like large file shares or large file system or something like that. That's what the LF stands for. And if you turn it on, then it stops keeping copies of the thing every single time. And it starts kind of just like tracking the deltas between the two. So, which is much nicer. If I kind of look at this commit, and I'm hoping I'll be able to do the changes, that's what I was looking for there. Okay, once I started checking this in with LFS, this is very gray, but it was keeping this 6.45 megabyte file here. And now that it was an LFS file, it's just 132 bytes. And then as we start to compare these two things, because they have this little LFS indicator, it's still showing us the file sizes, but it's not actually keeping a different file each time. So that may be one tip. If you're already doing PBIXs in Git, you're probably suffering from problems. Again, here, we would get, because of Git's natural structure of having descriptions and commit titles, we do get, GET, the benefit of having comments. So I can see, okay, Brent Lightsey changed this thing, and he put a comment on here. It wasn't a very good comment, but he could put a better comment and description and explain what he was doing to the PBIX files. And it is a little easier to enforce better rules here because they can go through processes that Git enforces. But again, still doesn't get us quite where we want to go. What we want to be able to do is say, what did he change, right? That's what we're looking for. So in June, and the main impetus for why I wanted to talk about this topic, they have introduced in preview, a new feature called the Power BI project file type. So that has a .pbip extension, and I'm sure I can share in the chat the link that I kind of follow to turn this on. You have to turn it on again in the preview features. There it is, next to last, Power BI project save option. So what does that mean if we save something as a Power BI project? We'll do a save as. We'll hit browse this device. And when you turn that on and you restart, you've always had the option for PBIX, that's the file and all of its data, a PBIT, which is really the file and no data, just the report and all the queries on how to get the data, but no data itself. So this has been another option for maybe saving in SharePoint and saving in Git if you have an extremely large file. But now there's an even better one, a PBIP extension. So if we go and save this in our, I'm going to kind of put this in the same location as a PBIP. Let's see what happens. It says working on it, it did a save, and all right, all good. What actually happened in our folder? Well, we got quite a bit more in our folder here. We had not just one file added. Here's the PBIP file. It's only 1 kilobyte large, but several files. In fact, a couple of folders that are filled with files. So it added a git ignore file for us, which is really going to help us to ignore the right kinds of files. But these 2 folders are pretty interesting as well. So there's this F1, that was the name of our project, .dataset. And if we look in here, we start to see several JSON files. So things that appear to be maybe telling us about the structure of the dataset. Here's a .pbi dataset and a model.bim file, which has a lot of information about the tabular model itself. And there's several things in here that the project's managing that probably we don't want to mess with too much. They have said, though, that these formats are public, and that I think that would suggest that there's going to be more tools that can work with these formats, and they're going to kind of have a published definition for them, which is pretty cool. So, okay, we got a whole bunch of files. How does that help us? That's a legitimate question. What I actually forgot what I need to do is to save this into a local folder that is my Git repo. And then when we see that, it starts to make a lot of sense. So I have this Git repo here. I'll just call it f1.pbip. I'll show kind of the experience of what this looks like here in Git using fork. Also might turn on dark mode just to create a little more contrast from the window behind it. There we go. Now in my Git repo, now that I saved a PBIP file, like all Git repos, it tracks every change that goes on locally and gives you the opportunity to commit those changes. First, you just have to stage them into a commit, and then you have to actually commit them. So, wow, it made a bunch of stuff. Okay, cool. Well, the first thing we need to do is go ahead and get them all committed. All right. Initial commit. All right. We did it. Excellent. Now let's actually change something. We'll go to our report and win % by nationality. This is cool. Let's change our color here and just see what happens if I get this graph selected. Bars. Let's make it a cool orange. Yeah. We hit save. And before, when we looked in fork and it was showing us, okay, one was gobbledygook and the other one's gobbledygook, but all I can tell you is that something changed. Now we actually get a pretty good diff between these two things. It's starting to show us. I'm actually going to go into a side-by-side view. So you can tell I kind of like this this tool, but there's other Git tools out there, and Git is the engine that's keeping track of. Tell me exactly what changed. I see Alex is typing, so I'm waiting for his comment there, but it changed something in this report.json file that was buried in there. And we could diff the two things, something about the active selection index, and then something in the config. I assume it changed the color somewhere in here. So while I would say, yeah, here we go. Properties fill, solid color expression. Okay, the color ID is 4 instead of where it used to be. If I put that on top of each other, that might be easier. The color ID is 4 here, where it used to, I guess, not have a color ID, which I guess would mean it was the default. Yes, Alex. So Alex put a comment in. You're right on. He's like, this is kind of exciting because now we don't have to depend on a human being to remember what they changed. Git will keep track of that for us. So much more reliable, especially just knowing people's brains, how they work. Yeah, some room for improvement, definitely. So when you change, any little change, like that was a pretty small one, it made a pretty significant code change in the PBIP, and that's a lot for a small change like that. So does this make it immediately obvious to someone looking at it? Brent changed a color. Not without some looking, right? Not without some kind of deep squinting and analysis sometimes, but at least it's there. At least it's there. And I can come in and call this thing color change, and I could put a good description. I changed the color of the win. I'm really good. I can go along and actually commit, well, even commit or, what's the word? There's another kind of partial commit, but I could create commits as I go along and not have to push my branch until I'm done. So now we've got this commit. The title is called color change. It does have my nice description I added to it, and I can hit changes and see the same experience. So yes, this should be very helpful. I also wanted to show earlier on a different file. In this case, I changed the source of a table of one of my queries. It was looking at a local file. I wanted it to look at SharePoint. And so this shows the impact of a change like that. There was a change in that model.bim file, model.bim. Those are also the files you'll see in Azure Analysis Services models, and just basically the Vertipack tabular data engine can be described by these files. And this one was much clearer. It was like, all right, I changed this line of my source expression from a local file to a SharePoint file. That's a lot clearer. Yeah, and that's basically all I did. So in general, my experience so far has been changes in the data model and even in the layout tabular relationship model view are fairly easy to read. And then changes in the report layer itself involve a ton of JSON and are hard to read. So let's do one more to kind of see another example of that. So I'm on my page 1 here. I'm literally just going to I can just like drag this over to the other side of the page and resize it a little bit. Let's see what the impact of that is. All right, local changes, it picked that up. Yeah, quite a bit here. Okay, this makes it maybe a little clearer that we were doing some repositioning going on, but really it changed this whole config element again, and it's like, you can see how if you work for 30 minutes or an hour and you're making lots of changes, there's going to be a lot in this file that's not always going to be real obvious what changed. So however, I do think we start to see maybe this is more feasible of 2 developers working concurrently on a Power BI report and then coming back at some later point to merge their changes together. I would still probably encourage like frequent merges and not trying to take 50 commits from both developers and mash them together. That could be difficult. So fully like, oh yeah, we're free, this is open source. I don't think we're quite there yet. But I do think that this is a great step in the right direction, and it shows the fruits of some of the labors that we've been hearing about from the rumblings that this was coming from Microsoft sooner or later. Yeah, so I'll stage this, I'll commit it, and let me pause for a second. This is kind of the big reveal or demo here, but any thoughts, questions about this so far? Yes, okay, gotcha, Alex. I see your question. You mentioned, can I do this with Power BI files hosted on the cloud versus a local system, for example, reverting back to an old version on Git? I feel like I saw something about that they were going to kind of make PBIPs in the cloud by default, so you could start doing this, but my current answer is I don't know of a way to do it. Doesn't mean it can't be done. there's no reason you couldn't pull them out of the cloud and run them through a CI/CD process using the APIs and the, and using pipelines in Azure DevOps or whatever your CI/CD platform is, your source control platform is. Ryan, which versions or something? Okay. Yeah, I didn't. I don't know, Alex. That's a good. You mentioned in there from Ryan's point of view. I'm sorry, maybe that wasn't intended for all of us there, but yeah. So that's what it is today. So we should also go through before we kind of turn everybody loose and say, all right, go make your versions. There are a few caveats. So one of the first and most prominent, I've been working in this as a PBIP, and now if I'm ready to publish this, this publish icon is disabled. Well, I believe this is only the case that it's disabled because this is a preview feature. So essentially the feeling I get is, hey, we're turning this on in Power BI Desktop so you can start to learn with it, play with it, and give us feedback is always what they want in a public preview. So if you do get to mess with it, then actually one of the neat things is the announcement about this came from, I believe it was like the product owner, and then also Zoe Douglas. And Zoe was one of our Oklahoma Power BI user group leaders until early last year, when she went to work for Microsoft. Let me just make sure I can pull this up here. PBIP Power BI, how about that? There we go. She's in the video down here about the announcements. There she is. So, if you're part of the Oklahoma Power BI user group, you're going to have more of an option. And this article does walk you through everything that you need to know to kind of get going on this. But I'll go ahead and jump down to some of the limitations. So you can publish this currently. Sorry, backing up one step. It's very likely you'll be able to hit publish once this goes live, and the service also supports these projects as well as the desktop tool. In the meantime, you still can just do another save as and go back to browse this device and save it back as a PBIX. Works totally fine. Kind of recompiles it, I guess, from its project form to its PBIX form, and then it can be published at that point. So demo. No problem. Mostly, vanilla and easy breezy experience here. One thing I did notice though is there is something about the transition between when it goes to become a Power BI project and then I saved it back into a PBIX. It wasn't a PBIX alone its whole life. And I notice when I hit, if I'm out in the service and I try to download that file now, I no longer get this option. It says this option isn't available because the data model is configured for large data sets. So essentially they're thinking of this more like you're really big. They're assuming it's a really big data set because they can tell you use some kind of external tool to mess with it as a project. Those of you who work with very large data sets or analysis services models have seen this before, but it's something to keep in mind. And then again, if you're doing good source control, maybe you don't want people downloading from here anyway, right? Maybe that's part of the whole point is like, hey, don't download from the service the whole file anymore. It's pointless. Just go get it from source control if you need it, right? But that is a caveat to keep in mind. I don't know if that will change when the features all GA. So any changes? So yeah. I don't want to read through all these verbatim, but there are some limitations right now. Let's just say that for sure, including things like that you might keep in mind as you're working through these. This could, limit you in certain places. So not aware of changes made with other tools or applications. So if you're combining this with other external tools like ALM Toolkit, which really doesn't make any changes, but like a tabular editor, which certainly does, how are all these things going to kind of play together? There are some things that aren't supported, like sensitivity labels. And here it is. Yeah, this is exactly what Taguma. Basically, I think Taguma mentioned this, and honestly, I just kind of missed it. Workspaces with Git integration. I need to figure that out. That may be something we talk about next time, because it sounds like what the answer to your question, Alex, should be yes. If try to figure out what that means. So a lot of things kind of, and even though you can save directly to OneDrive and SharePoint for PBIXs, you can't do that with PBIPs right now. It's 14 files to synchronize. You got all these things changing and in preview, and so it's a good step in the right direction for sure. And I think it's something to keep an eye on, especially after it GAs. So let me just finish off with one slide, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, I think. Forgot to update the slides as we were going along, but that's Git with PBIPs. There we go. A little table to try to show among the options we looked at today, what do you get and what do you not get with those options. So with a local sync, you do get the version control, but you don't have any comments or any commentary metadata about what changed. You also definitely can't diff and merge them. You can just go back to a previous version. So you got to pick A or B, but you can't mash them together into AB. And so online saving, pretty much similar experience. You're just kind of deciding whether I'm to save it locally and let my client upload it, or I'm just going to let Power BI upload it. The check-in checkout feature may be worth exploring if you if you feel like I've got a user base, they're really good Power BI developers, but I'm not sure they're going to be able to pick up Git. I can understand that. Historically, Git has been a bit more technical. I would say those UI tools can make it a little easier if it's mostly just learning the concepts of what does it mean to make a branch and what does it mean to make a commit. If they can get down those things and then know how to push their branches out to somewhere where you can submit a pull request, that is a way that's like a gated way for those branches to be merged. There's a few steps people have to learn, but if they can learn Power BI, they can probably learn to do that. And then I would say when they get themselves kind of in trouble with Git, that you might need to support them if it's like, you got to roll back or rebase or something like that. Cool. And then, with your Git PBIXs, you get your commented versions. It can work. Do turn on LFS if you're going to stick your PBIXs in Git source control. And then with these PBIPs, in theory, you get all three of these things. Now, again, keep in mind your diffing and merging could be a little bit inscrutable, might be the word, or difficult to scrut. But it's there. So those are the main things I wanted to cover today in talking about version control. Any other questions or things you'd like to know more about? Well, I was just putting in the chat there. We will definitely take some time, let's say in September's meeting, to look at those Git-backed workspaces and try to understand more what that was about. It's certainly in a phase really ever since May of so much changing at once. It's a little hard to know. We're changing 5 things at once. How many of them are compatible with each other? And Alex, yes, that is a great point. Yeah, we should definitely look at Copilot and what it is doing. So, for a long time in Power BI, we definitely won't look at it much today, but, for a long time, they've had these, like insights, right? There it is, right? Oh, that's not a card. Anyway, they've had these generative insights where it's like, hey, we'll build you a smart narrative and we'll tell you about what's going on with your visuals, right? So if I picked this and then I tried to put a smart narrative on it, we'll look more into this at the time. And I don't know, for a while it's been like, okay, that's maybe helpful or maybe not. They've also had quick measures, and now they've always been trying to get closer to how can we make it NLP, natural language processing, for me to just say, total up my total points by, but split them out by the finishes. So with the advancement of large language models, maybe that is something that would be possible. Or obviously these like win percentage and podium percentages, these are measures that we created. So maybe there's a way that it could know that this is what we wanted to get for did not finish percentage, a calculate and a divide and those kinds of things. It's certainly possible. I could say I'll take help writing DAX anytime. If they can kind of shortcut me to the correct DAX, I would be more than happy for it to do that. So yeah, so Alex, maybe you'd be willing to share some of how you're using GPT. Are you doing that for DAX with your code generation? And I know you're kind of mostly on chat, so while you're writing,
I can jump in.
Oh, hey, thanks, Alex.
Yeah, no problem. So basically, in my case, I started using GPT because I was jumping between languages a lot. So like Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, C#, etc. Now I'm basically just using it to like optimize and clean up code that I've already written, or really just to like fill in pre-made templates. Kind of for the Power BI stuff, I really haven't used the AI at all yet. I kind of was thinking it was going to go in the direction that you showed, where it just kind of writes like a little generative story. But yeah, I think where it's probably going to be most interesting for me is like text to SQL, and trying to give that to like non-technical people to maybe generate like a table report, something like that, just on the fly.
Nice. Okay. So when you say text to SQL, so like say like more let them describe a query that they want to build in SQL.
Yep. Okay. I've
Nice.
basically been testing that out just on some social applications lately, and I think it would probably work pretty good for just like grabbing well data, like maybe all wells in Ohio, and it just generates the SQL query for it.
I don't see why not. And I think where those SQL sources, SQL and relational database sources are much more mature is just they've always had the need for like really robust metadata, right? So in order to write that SQL correctly, it's got to know what the tables are named and the columns and things like that. So I'm sure it has to somehow kind of process that first.
Luckily, it's pretty good just right off the bat, like GPT or probably even the Llama models. With SQL, I'm probably just going to end up feeding all the table schemas into it and seeing where I end up.
That's cool. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. To me, I've always felt like one of the biggest challenges in doing that with DAX is that DAX is very dependent on what this picture looks like. So the same piece of DAX written, this formula could mean totally different things depending on what this picture looks like, or give you totally different results. So I've always felt like that's going to be hard for a model to guess what the correct thing is until it has to understand all the layers of measures we built, and then finally what those base layer measures, how they know, they have insider knowledge of what this model looks like. I'm sure it's nothing that isn't stored in metadata somewhere. I guess there's just a lot of human understanding to it of like, what do these things mean? What is a race? What is a driver? What are the results? And they make intuitive sense to us and how those things ought to relate. A driver, competes in a race and he gets a result in that race, or in the case of Formula One. But I could see it getting people a lot closer, even without the metadata, perhaps, or maybe even just write me a measure that does this, and then from there they can kind of figure out what that means. I don't know. I still feel like it's going to be hard to know whether or not you got the right measure if you don't have any concept of like filter context and evaluation context. But it's AI is continuing to do things that weren't possible in the last few years. So maybe, I need to experience what that Copilot's like and see what they're doing with it. Yeah.
I think it's going to be a lot of just like breaking new ground. So. I'm basically just trial and erroring at this point.
Okay, for sure. We will put Copilot on the list. So thanks. Okay, great. Well, I hope that in today's presentation you were able to pick up something useful, even if it was some feature about SharePoint and OneDrive you didn't know before. And if you've never seen Git before, hopefully that was a fairly non-scary introduction to it. No terminal needed, although you can use the terminal if you want to, the command line stuff. Fork makes this easy, and I think they charge a license of $40, they say, although you can also get it for free for a trial. And I've always been a little confused because they have a price tag on it, but then they've never like required me to pay. So I did pay once, and hopefully that's good. But anyway, yeah, if in the meantime, if you have questions, I definitely would encourage you to check out our community site, which for ease, you can always go to okpug.org, and we have that domain as a way to forward to wherever in the world our community is supposed to be now. Really, where we are now is community.fabric.microsoft.com. So they took all of the Power BI communities and just wholesale renamed them to Fabric. I'm going to stick with Pug and not call it a FUG, because that's just kind of strange. So yeah, but for sure, we have had a little more kind of back and forth here on the discussion boards, and I've been glad to see that. I need to get my notifications turned back on, but I do check here from time to time. So um, I don't know who posted this one. I did post that in my Slack group, but I never saw any responses. So not sure about region availability right now, but certainly encourage you to keep an eye out here and join this group if you haven't already, to stay up to date with our events and discussion boards. We also do have a meetup page, so you can follow that one if that's easier. Yeah, with that, I'm just going to say thanks to Taguma and thanks to all of you, and just have one more. Any final comments before we adjourn from anybody? All right, great. Hey, thank you all for your time today, and I hope you have a really wonderful week, and we'll see you next month. Bye.